I'm not being dramatic. This might be the beginning of the end for the UFC, and I was definitely very wrong about the UFC betting scandal when I said this. It's really difficult to convincingly throw a fight. We will all see it. All of this behavior is suspicious, and it's hard to do convincingly. Well, maybe I was wrong because this isn't confirmed, but it seems like there's potentially a huge number of UFC fights that are being investigated for potentially being rigged. And I've also said previously that I think Jason Herzog is a very good referee, but it turns out maybe his hands aren't entirely clean. Although since I started working on this follow-up video, he did go to Twitter to kind of address this controversy, and it reads to me like what you would write if you were innocent, but I've been wrong before. It should be noted that all of this talk about these fixed fights and the scale of this and Herzog's potential involvement, it's all coming from one unverified source, so we should proceed cautiously. Although Ariel Helwani, who is very in tune with fighters and what happens in the sport, he did make a claim that this was not an isolated incident and that he does know of a lot of fighters who have been approached in the past about fixing fights. So maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's harder to tell if a fight is fixed than I initially thought. And if that's true, if there's a very large number of potentially fixed fights in the UFC, then I think we're looking at a very, very dark time in MMA. What the UFC has going for it is that it is obviously the biggest promotion in the sport, and it brings with it an air of legitimacy because it has always been the best fighting the best, and it's the premier organization. But if that legitimacy is questioned, I'm not really sure where the sport goes from here. The UFC are already shedding some fans due to their hard right political turn, and I think the exodus would be a lot more significant if we can't trust whether or not the fights are legitimate. I really don't want to get to a point where we're watching fights, and if there's a close decision that gets scored the way most people disagree with, that we just go, oh yeah, that's probably one of those fixed fights we're watching. Or if there's a controversial stoppage or foul call or a point deduction, I don't want to have that same creeping thought that maybe the referee is compromised. And what's worse is I don't really have a concrete solution for what we do now. So if you have one, please let me know in the comments. Maybe we should make referees accountable for their decisions and they have to, answer questions in the media. The UFC released Bulgarian, which seems like a pretty obvious move. And I guess another very obvious move would be if you're ever caught tampering with fights, it's a lifetime ban and you can't ever be associated with the sport again. Maybe being friends with James Krause should be disqualifying to be a UFC fighter. And just like every other sporting event in the world, the UFC is constantly showing us betting lines during the broadcast. Maybe instead of just showing us what the betting line is, they could show us the movement of that line, like where the line opened versus where it closed, since that's usually a big red flag when it comes to a fight being fixed. I don't know. If you have a better solution than those, please let me know in the comments. I really hope we get a resolution here where it's not this huge number of fights being fixed, the bad actors are kicked out of the sport, and we can move on with a legitimate UFC, legitimate fights, and it's actually fun to watch because we don't assume that these are all rigged. Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching.